one.
Okay, no worries.
Let that safe on life. Hi everyone, very happy to be joined by Joanna Dodd today. Do you want to start us off with an intro to you and your books?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Joanna. I'm really pleased to be here tonight. I've written 2 psychological thrillers. The first one, The Summer Dare, was published last year. And the next one, which is called She Wants You Gone, is actually published tomorrow. So this is kind of the eve of publication day, which is very exciting.
It is. Have you got any plans for tomorrow?
Tomorrow I'm gonna, sadly I've got to go to work, got to do my day job, and then go out for a nice dinner to celebrate, I think, and hopefully gonna have a book launch in a few weeks' time. So that should also be fun.
Just sounds fun. Do you want to tell us about the premise of the new one so that people who are watching can...
Yeah, sure. So She Wants You Gone is the story of Beth, who moves from London to a tiny hamlet in the remote Suffolk countryside with her new husband and her 13-year-old stepdaughter, Dolly. And almost as soon as she arrives, Beth realizes that something is very wrong, definitely with Dolly and probably with the hamlet as well. And then the book follows her as she discovers just how wrong things are, and tries to find her way out of the situation she's got herself into.
It's quite a good story. I finished it today.
Ooh, exciting!
I know, and I think there was a quote in your author's notes from Sherlock Holmes that I thought was quite interesting that you said inspired you.
Yes, so it's a quote about it's like Holmes and Watson having a conversation, and Watson is talking about how he can't imagine anything terrible happening in the countryside because it's also beautiful and peaceful, and surely nothing bad could ever happen in a place like that. And then Holmes basically says that, compared to London, all kinds of terrible crimes happen, and the kind of very remoteness of the countryside is one of the things that maybe means that sometimes like horrific things can happen in a way that they wouldn't be able to in a crowded city. And I guess that kind of spoke to me a bit, because although I love going to the countryside and it's obviously a great place to spend time, for me personally, I'm a city person, and I think I get a bit jittery when I'm away from a big city, and there is always that sense of like, ooh, I wonder what's going on behind closed doors. And so I think I had several ideas that came together in this book, but I think the whole thing kind of really took off when I started to think about, ooh, maybe if I set it somewhere very remote. And this is a tiny hamlet with literally 3 houses and a boarded up pub. So there's not a lot of people around, and the people who are around might have some secrets as well.
So I'm relatively familiar with Suffolk. My mum is from there.
Oh, okay.
And there are some tiny places. My nan used to live in one that was about 10 houses.
Oh wow, okay.
Big, but I'm presuming Fortune's Yard is made up.
Yeah, so I made up a place. It's, as you say, it's called Fortune's Yard, and it's got quite a sinister history as well. So the history kind of plays into it a little bit too, but it's not actually based on a real place, although it's set very near some real places, so like Orford and Aldborough, that kind of bit of the Suffolk coast. But yeah, it's a fictional place, which is probably just as well given all the things that go on there in the book, I think.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't want all the things that go on there to be happening in a real tiny village.
No. But yeah, I have been to some sort of very tiny hamlets, and that again kind of fed into my inspiration of what would it be like to live. You're quite cut off from people, but you're actually quite close to your neighbours, and so you're this very kind of tight, tiny community. And what would that be like in practice? And I guess as someone who lives in, like I say, a big city, I'm kind of interested in what that dynamic would be like.
We've got some comments on the stream about that. So okay. Leslie said hello.
Hello.
She said, give her the country over a big city any day.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people feel like that. So that's why I guess I was interested. I think I'm quite unusual in sort of being a city person at heart, and I don't know where that really came from because I grew up in the country. But I for a lot of people, the country is the kind of the perfect place to live, and I can totally see that. I guess what I was interested in with this book was the possibilities of a remote setting. So coming back to that Sherlock Holmes comment, being cut off from the world, which is, you know, quite a difficult thing to be in the 21st century, is still quite an intriguing idea from the point of view of sort of crime fiction. And I think that really spoke to me with the particular idea that I wanted to explore, which was kind of the escalating tension between Beth and her stepdaughter. And what if this is happening in an environment where they don't actually, you know, they're quite cut off from other people and other interaction.
I'm with you on the city thing.
Okay, interesting.
So I live in a city and would always choose to.
Okay, that is interesting. Yeah, that stopped me feeling too much like I'm a sort of out of step with everyone.
And basically, if there's not a bookshop and a coffee shop somewhere within relatively easy striking distance, I'm not that interested.
Yeah, no, I definitely have that feeling as well. And yeah, this is a place definitely, as I say, there was a pub, but there's not even a pub anymore. And that kind of comes into the story as well at various points. The pub is a slightly sinister presence as well.
It is a little bit, yeah. And Victoria Dowd has said Miss Marple would agree with you.
Yes, that's true. Actually, she definitely has the same view, doesn't she?
The other thing I quite liked about it is it's quite modern in some aspects, isn't it? So one of the people in it is an influencer and kind of making their living from that kind of thing, which is quite modern, but it has a lot of elements of Gothic kind of fiction woven through it.
Yeah, I guess it does kind of mix, as you say, modernity and some much sort of older influences. And Beth, the main character, as you say, she's a cook, a baker, and she's trying to start a kind of a baking company, and she has this online presence. And as you say, she's trying to be a bit of an influencer. So there's a whole storyline that relates to what's happening to her online, where she's also having some problems. But then, as you say, there's also a kind of historical storyline almost, which plays into the history of this small hamlet and some of the things that have happened there in the past, some of the dark things that have happened in there, which became a kind of subject of fascination for the stepdaughter, who gets very caught up in this kind of sinister history as well.
Is that one of the reasons why you chose to set it in Suffolk? Because there is kind of
I think I wanted to pick somewhere. I mean, there is. There's obviously a particular witchcraft history to Suffolk, and it was interesting reading a bit more about that. I think I wanted to set it somewhere where I was familiar with the countryside, and Suffolk is one of the places where I feel like I've got to know the countryside a bit. It's not where I grew up, but it's somewhere I've been quite a bit. So I think that was partly why I picked it. And it also sometimes has that feeling of sort of tremendous open skies and kind of isolation and at the same time. And I think that was something I wanted to explore as well. So there's all this space, but she's kind of trapped with this very specific group of people, which I think the Suffolk setting hopefully sort of plays into a bit.
You tend to get, from my experience of Suffolk, which is limited, you tend to get sort of communities that haven't really moved a lot as well. So they've been there a long time and they're very rooted in their
exactly
place.
And that kind of comes up in the book as well. So the hamlet where they moved to is actually where Beth's new husband, who's called Noah, it's where he grew up and where his parents lived until very recently. And basically they're moving into his parents' old house. And some of the other people in this hamlet had been there a very long time as well. So Beth is kind of the stranger in this place where everyone else has some kind of purchase already on what it's like to live there, which adds to her isolation because she feels like she's an outsider, and there are all these kind of customs and traditions and the history of the place which she's not really familiar with and which she is kind of wary of, but she's not sure whether her wariness is kind of just a low level, this is a bit strange, or is there something actually quite disturbing going on here. So her status as an outsider is an important part of that, I think.
Which is, I think, in those sort of communities that have been rooted in the countryside for quite a long time, can be a thing. You can sort of go in and feel like an outsider.
I think so. And I obviously not all sort of communities that you move into would be like that. And this is very much my kind of imagining of what it might be like if you moved into a place where people seem friendly and welcoming, but maybe they've got this kind of shared past that you're not part of. And after a while, that might become quite difficult as well, however much you want to kind of fit in. And Beth is a very sort of friendly, positive character, and actually carries on being quite friendly and positive. She's doing her best to kind of to make the most of this situation and to think, well, probably things aren't as bad as I think they are. And by the time she realizes that perhaps they are, it's kind of too late.
You listed another kind of inspiration at the back in the author's notes. I don't know how much we can talk about it without giving it away, but sort of it comes around like the blended family and the young people.
Yeah. So I was very interested in partly in this idea of a blended family, but also just in the idea of a child whose behavior is perhaps a little odd, but not, maybe you keep noticing things that this child does that nobody else seems to be noticing, or in this particular case, the child behaves quite differently depending on who's present. And I think I was interested in that idea of sort of exploring, again, the extent to which that might just be like normal behavior, that she's a 13-year-old child. And, obviously 13-year-old children sometimes behave in sort of stroppy, typical adolescent teenage ways. So again, Beth, who doesn't have any children of her own until she marries Noah and Dolly becomes her stepdaughter, and wants to make the most of this situation, but isn't quite sure whether what she's encountering is kind of normal hostility or something else. And also isn't quite sure whether, she seems to be the only person who's picking up on this. Is there perhaps something wrong with her? Or, why does no one else seem to realize that there might be something wrong? So I guess I wanted to explore that, and the fact that she's, that she's Dolly's stepmother, just, I think, played into the idea that she hasn't got that much experience to build on. She doesn't really know this child very well. She doesn't know what happened to the child in the past. She's not that familiar with children in general, and she's trying to make the best of this situation and trying to gauge what's actually going on.
Which I think is quite, because teenagers can be intimidating, even if you're familiar with.
Exactly. And I think that was another thing. So I think we've all been there where you've been trying to make awkward conversation with like a teenage relative or a child of a friend, or possibly even your own child. So I think there is that that slightly intimidating feeling, like you say. And in this case, it's really her trying to work out, is this something that I can just, I just need to get over and deal with, and it's just perfectly normal. And she spends quite a lot of time online trying to sort of get advice about how to deal with this new blended family situation and what's the best thing to do, because she really wants, somebody to kind of reassure her. But obviously, as things develop, she, starts to question whether her approach of just kind of continually make this work is actually the right one or not.
And I mean, it's tricky to know, isn't it? I would imagine what the right approach is in fiction or not.
Definitely. And I did a bit of sort of research when I was thinking of this idea. So I was looking at, and there are a lot of websites out there particularly about blended families, actually, and how to make that situation work, and some of the sort of challenges that might arise and how best to deal with them. And so it was quite interesting, sort of just reading different people's approaches and thinking about the different things that might be disconcerting for a child to do as well. So not all of it is kind of overt hostility. In fact, very little of it is. And that was something I wanted to sort of play with as well. So it's not obvious what's going on. She has to kind of piece it together, and she's in this very isolated position where she hasn't really got anyone she can ask, which is where the kind of online advice comes into it as well, I think.
Yeah, which is where it's that interesting interplay again, isn't it, between the modern and the sort of older sort of style in the thing, because it's like very much online. Her life seems to be very much online. Beth, it's where she goes to for any kind of advice. She just, and especially when she's away from her friends who she would just, go for a coffee with or something. That's like the first place she'll reach.
Exactly. Yeah, I think she's cut off from the friends that she had when she lived in London, and there are a couple of points in the book where she does, she manages to have phone calls with her sort of best friend from London, but she's very isolated from what was, as you say, quite a kind of tight network of friends that she could sort of ask for advice, and instead she does sort of turn to the online world and also to the people around her in the hamlet. But again, that might be going on, there's more going on there than she immediately realizes. So they're not necessarily the most helpful source of advice.
No. Did you spend a lot of time in Suffolk while you were planning it, or?
I've spent time there over the years, like on holidays and things. So I think I tried to sort of draw on those memories rather than spending a sort of specific time there thinking, oh, I'm going to set this book here. I think I've got quite a lot of kind of, as I say, just kind of memories to draw on. And for me anyway, writing a book, it really helps to set it in a place that I've actually been and know comparatively well. So that was quite an important consideration, that it was somewhere I felt, fairly familiar with, I think.
I think maybe, I'm interviewing you about this and thinking, why would you go on holiday to Suffolk? Because my frame of reference has always been to go and visit family.
I think
there's nothing wrong with it. There's it's just in my head, it's not a holiday destination, but because it's like,
I mean, I've been on holiday to lots of other places as well. It's just yeah. I guess
the other thing, lovely. It's just as a holiday destination, there's lots of lovely places.
There are, and I guess I could have sat it in Devon or Cornwall, both of which, again, I've been on holiday to, I'm quite familiar with, and both of which have remote sort of communities. I think the Suffolk thing, it partly was just, I've got this image in my head of like big skies and kind of fairly flat landscape. And I know not all of Suffolk is like that, but the bit I'm familiar with is, and again, I really like that combination of kind of massive open space, but she's in this tiny kind of quite tight-knit, quite closed-in community. And I think that was, when I see it in my head, that's what comes to mind instantly. So I think that's probably why it ended up being Suffolk than, somewhere like Cornwall, which could equally have worked.
No, I think it works perfectly. Sorry, it's completely just me, because it's like, I wouldn't think where I live now is somewhere you would go on holiday. Do you know when you think it's somewhere so normal that you just go and visit because your family are there, or wherever else, you don't think of it as a holiday destination? That's what I was saying.
Yeah, no, I think that's true of wherever you live though, isn't it? It's always hard to imagine, like, why would anyone come here when you're familiar with it?
Yeah. But it works perfectly. Like I said, I know, like, we used to go and visit family and they'd lived in these little tiny villages at like just a few houses, and like you said, a pub or a shop, and then there's like not much else, like 10 houses and a pub, so it is a perfect location for a book like you've written. And Sarah has asked, she said, if you found your best location for a book, where would it be?
Well, that's a really good question, because I've been trying to think of sort of ideas for new books, and one of them might involve quite an overseas location, possibly quite a nice overseas location. But I'm thinking I would definitely need a research trip to go and check it out, because, as I said, I really need to be able to kind of have experienced a place to be able to write about it, I think. So I'm trying to think of kind of hot, luxurious places where I might be able to go for a week and do some book research. So I've kind of got an idea kicking around in my head, and yeah, maybe outside the UK this time. Again, I quite like the idea of a quite shut off location though, so maybe somewhere where it's not so easily accessible to the rest of the world. But yeah, more work needed to be done on an exact location, I think.
Would you think like somewhere like an island location, maybe? Islands, I think, are good for kind of crime novels, aren't they? Because you can pull them off relatively easily as well.
Yeah, and there's a good strong tradition of islands, and that's going sort of right back to Agatha Christie, with that kind of, again, that very cut off, limited number of people who are present, limited number of possibilities, and that kind of the tension of that just being this isolation that people have to make a real effort to be able to escape from. So yeah, an island somewhere lovely and sunny a long way away sounds great.
See, I'd have suggested Iceland because it's a small population, but
Iceland, yeah,
it's not going to be warm and sunny.
No, I'm thinking of combining research for a future book with some kind of summer holiday. So yeah, maybe Iceland though. That also has some appeal. I've never been there.
So you got more books ongoing, or?
Yeah, definitely. So I am currently just thinking of some ideas for possible book 3 and beyond, and just sort of filling out those ideas at the moment and plotting, because before I start writing, I need to have a fairly good idea of where I'm going to end up. So I spend quite a lot of time sort of thinking ideas through, thinking the characters through, before I actually start. Otherwise, I get very stuck when I start. So if I've got a clear idea of where I'm going, I can kind of keep going. So at the moment, I'm very much at that kind of planning stage, but I hope to get writing before too long as well.
So when you're coming up with the idea and in that plotting stage, do you come up with what gives you the main inspiration? Is it just sort of ideas or stories you come across, or do you get the characters and kind of have their arc in mind first?
Sure. I think it normally starts with an idea, or more often several ideas coming together, which is the case with She Wants You Gone as well. I think there were kind of 2 main ideas that suddenly came together in my head, and then the setting, and then I was like, right, okay, I think I've got the whole idea. So it tends to be ideas and plots rather than characters to start with, but then the characters, again, I need them clear in my head before I can start. So I will spend quite a lot of time sort of sketching them out and thinking about their background and how they fit into this plot. But it is normally some kind of intriguing idea. And because I write psychological thrillers, it's normally like, when you have those random thoughts, like what would I do if X happened? It's normally that starts the idea in my head. So just some bizarre thought that you think of on the way to work in the morning kind of plays around in your head, and you start to imagine, well, if I put a character in this situation, what would they do? And then, as I say, quite often it will come together with another idea, and I'll realize that they can work together. Or I'll read something and think, quite often, again, in the news, sometimes like news stories spark off ideas for me as well. Just, again, filling out maybe something that's already kicking around in my head. But it's definitely ideas and plot that come first for me. I know it's different for other people.
Maybe it's different depending on what you're writing as well.
I think it must be, yeah. And psychological thrillers are very sort of plot driven, and there's quite a desire to have a strong hook, so a strong kind of concept that readers can quickly think, oh, that's intriguing. How would that work? So again, when I'm trying to come up with new ideas, I guess I am partly thinking about that as well. What would the hook be? What's going to kind of pull people in and make them think they want to read it? And it's a very sort of crowded market as well. So again, what's going to make this different? What's going to make people want to read this? Because there's so many good psychological thrillers out there.
There is, but what then made you want to write psychological thrillers?
That's a really great question. You should have tried to write something that was less of. I think it's partly because I am intrigued by those questions. So what would you do if X happened? Or if you were in this situation where you thought this thing was happening, how would you react? I've always liked crime fiction. So, right from when I started reading, I think, I started on Agatha Christie at a very young age and basically have read crime fiction ever since. I came to psychological thrillers quite late on, I think, but as soon as I did, I was kind of intrigued by the hook that draws you in the sense that this character is normally facing some kind of dilemma where you think, well, what would I do if I was in that situation? And then I guess I just had an idea that seemed to work in that genre for the first book. I don't think I necessarily set out to write a psychological thriller, if that makes sense. I had a story in my head and a kind of series of questions. And then as I started writing I kind of felt like it fitted into that genre. And then, I've read more and more in that genre. And now I guess I'm like a big fan of it. And I think for me, the kind of hooky question is the thing that sucks me in when I'm reading it, and the thing I want to sort of recreate when people are reading my work as well.
So would you venture out of the genre?
I think I would. Yeah, I struggle to imagine writing anything other than crime fiction, because it really is my kind of my go-to read. Although I do read other stuff as well. But I certainly in the past have tried my hand at historical crime fiction, for instance. I love a good historical crime novel. So, and again, I kind of love that combination of the puzzle, but also the kind of glimpse you get of another world. And maybe that's why there's a slight historical element to She Wants You Gone. And also actually to my first book, The Summer Dare, there's also a kind of a storyline set in the 1920s in that book. So I guess that kind of interest in the past is semi there in my psych thrillers as well. But yeah, I would definitely think about writing a different kind of crime fiction at some point in the future, I think, because I very much sort of like all the different variations there are out there.
Yeah, me too. I am a big fan of historical crime fiction.
There's so much good stuff out there, and it just kind of gives you this window on another world, which I think is brilliant, and it's one of my favorite things to read.
So who are your go-to kind of psychological thriller authors?
I mean, that's so hard because there are so many great people out there. Of things I've read recently, I actually read my first Andrea Mara novel a few months ago, Someone in the Attic, which I really enjoyed. And again, it's got that kind of, without giving too much of the plot away, a kind of a normal person in a really strange situation, and how they kind of deal with that, and how the secrets of the past kind of gradually come out. I thought that was really, really good. I also have been really enjoying Lisa Hall's latest, which is called, I think, 8 Years of Lies, and is about, again, a woman again, seemingly normal situation, something extraordinary happens to you, and her husband just kind of vanishes, and she has to sort of unpick what's happened and what he's sort of told her over the years, and whether or not it's true, any of it in the end. So that was a great read as well. But I tried to read just as much psychological thriller fiction as I can find, because that's like when you're writing in a genre, it's really good to kind of read as wide a variety of books of as much as you can, basically, so you get a full range of what's out there at the moment.
Have you read Follow the Butterfly?
No, I haven't. Is that good?
It's Marta Kokkonen. Yes, it was one of my second favorite read of last year.
Ooh, okay, what was your favorite read of last year?
Mother Sea by Lorraine Wilson.
Okay,
it isn't crime at all.
Okay, interesting. So do you like crime fiction, but also like other fiction as well?
Yeah, absolutely, all sorts.
That's brilliant.
I'm quite nerdy. I like a lot of sci-fi and fantasy.
Okay, interesting.
Comics, things like that.
Yeah, I have a good friend who's very into sci-fi and has just branched out into reading psychological thrillers. She keeps saying that, yeah, there should be a sci-fi element in them as well.
I think they'd be good. If you think about it, you probably could write a really good psychological thriller kind of set up in space or
exactly
in the future or something. They would work. And you think about movies like Alien and stuff, there's like a lot of
there's definite potential there for kind of crossover genres. Well, maybe I always think about a psychological thriller, a historical psychological thriller is quite an interesting idea as well. Again, I know there's kind of, there are some examples out there, but I think that's quite an interesting crossover.
Yeah, and you sound like you'd be the person to kind of
maybe
delve into writing stuff like that if they're like your two favorite
Yeah, I could combine them.
Yeah, I can see, like, I know you'd probably be really good at blending them because you've already got those elements of history going on.
That's an interesting idea. Okay, so maybe my next book is going to be a historical psychological thriller set on an island off Iceland.
On an island somewhere nice and warm. Sarah's saying Follow the Butterfly was excellent.
Okay, great. I will definitely make a note of that then.
It's about a serial killer going for therapy.
Okay, brilliant. I'm going to remember that.
But it does not go where you thought it would.
Okay, great. So I love anything with a good twist or a good change of direction that you don't see coming, but then once it's happened, you think, oh yeah. So for me, the best kind of twists are the ones that you don't see, but make total sense once they've happened. And a change of direction that works like that is brilliant.
What thinking about that with your book, what's been the feedback from like the early readers? So it's out until tomorrow, but you will have had reviews.
I have, yeah. I've had some really good feedback and some really great comments. I think when you're writing something with a twist or with several twists, it's always obviously hard to gauge how much have you given away, because you want it to come as a surprise, but not the kind of surprise where someone's like, well, I could never have seen that coming. That's just ridiculous. And it's always hard judging that balance, I think. So one of the things I was really interested in those early reviews was, would people have seen the twists coming, and did they like them when they did come? And on that sort of side, it's been really positive, and I've had some really good feedback about the sort of the end part of the book being surprising, but also like in keeping with what's gone before, which is very much what I was aiming for. So I'm hoping that as more people read it once it's published tomorrow, that kind of positive feedback will continue.
I think I'd peg to the bad person was.
You what, sorry?
I think I'd peg to the...
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay.
The bad guy was like fairly early on.
Okay.
But definitely was left guessing by some of the other things.
Okay, great. Well, that's good. Yeah, I think hopefully there are enough, like it's not just one reveal, there are a number of things in there. So hopefully it's a combination that works overall for people. And it's always interesting hearing when people realize different things. And one of the things I've enjoyed with my first book is getting that feedback from readers. Some people don't guess any of it. Some people are like, oh, I began to realize just before. And sometimes people are like, oh, I knew right along. So I think it's kind of fascinating just to hear when people sort of piece things together. But as you say, hopefully there are always some surprises in there for people.
I think the interesting thing, especially with psychological thriller stuff, is like you don't always necessarily need to... It doesn't matter if you work out who's kind of the villain necessarily in the piece, because actually the most interesting thing is sort of the relationships between the people and how it unfurls. So even if you think you know who the bad guy is, which as you say, you've got to sort of play fair with the reader and hint at throughout, it doesn't matter because you're still going to see how... Exactly.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It's the genre isn't a big reveal of like who's the killer, or it's not a whodunit in that sense. Although sometimes psych thrillers can be a whodunit, and it's more a series of kind of revelations about what's actually going on here. And as you say, quite often knowing or sensing who might be the baddie doesn't detract from the kind of tension of other people not realizing and what's going to happen to them and are they going to realize in time.
Yeah, because it just adds to the suspense, really.
Yeah, and there's sometimes that thing of the reader knowing more than the characters themselves know, which I really like when I read books that do that. I think it's a very clever way of building the tension, because you're sitting there screaming, no, don't do that. And that just kind of, as you say, kind of ratchets up the tension again. I think you just have to again keep that balance though, because you don't want your character doing things where the reader just gives up on them because they're such an idiot and they keep going into ridiculous situations where you're like, no one would ever do that. So again, it's kind of keeping that slight element of reality in there as well. You know, would someone really plausibly do this or not?
Yeah, and that's kind of tricky, isn't it? Especially in like the genre you're writing in, because you've sort of got quite normal people in extraordinary-ish situations, and everybody reacts differently when put into a situation. So however you've written your character reacting is perfectly valid, but there could be people reading it going, well, that's ridiculous. They wouldn't do that, because that's not how they think they would behave.
No, that's so true. And I think in this particular case, Beth is a really positive character, and you know, she's in a strange situation, but she does try her best to kind of keep that positivity. And I hope I managed to get the balance right between her being positive and kind of trying to maintain that positivity, but not slipping over into just being kind of annoyingly positive in the light of the things that are happening to her. So I think there's quite a lot of her, it's told from her point of view mostly. So you get quite a lot of her kind of thought process, which I hope brings you with her rather than making you think, oh no, what's she doing? And, you know, she does on some level at some point realize what's going on. But as I say, by that point, it's getting a bit late in the day to do something about it.
And you have animals in this book as well, don't you? Which is always a pressure for an author.
Yeah, I do. So I actually don't think my first book did have any animals, but this one has 2 dogs. And I think entirely coincidentally, my brother got a new dog at roughly the same time I was writing this book. And I think she may have kind of worked her way into the book without my knowledge. At least one of the dogs has a kind of real life counterpart. They were kind of, I realized I don't think I set out to write about dogs, but as I was writing it, they turned out to be quite useful, because if you have a dog, you have to go out and walk it, and that kind of a presence again, and this kind of slightly odd dynamic between Beth and her stepdaughter. The dog is kind of like a mediating presence that sometimes brings them together, and it's also a reason for Beth to sort of to leave the hamlet sometimes and go on walks. And the other dog also sort of plays a kind of few key plot moments are dependent on that dog as well. So the dogs turned out to be strangely important, even though I didn't know I needed them when I started writing. I didn't do any character development on the dogs before I started. They were spontaneous dogs, I think.
And you have to look after the animals, because there are people who get very insensitive when it comes to a dog.
Yeah, so again, when I'm reading crime fiction and there's an animal in it, I do quite often wonder if something bad is going to happen to the animal. And I think I did briefly sort of play with the idea of something happening in this, but in the end, I decided, no, I didn't want nothing bad. So yeah, spoiler, nothing bad happens to either of the dogs. Some bad things happen to other people though.
There is a website, isn't there? You can look it up on, apparently. It's like
really?
a website called Does the Dog Die?
Okay, that's interesting.
Like, for people who get really upset about kind of animals being hurt, you can actually put in like the title of a movie or a book, and it tells you.
Oh wow, okay. I didn't know that. I think my mum would not have forgiven me if I'd done anything bad to the dogs. So. But yeah, I definitely, when I'm reading crime fiction, I'm conscious that animals are kind of sometimes, and so I've seen this done to brilliant effect as well, not always, but sometimes that can be, I can't remember, I was reading something recently where the dog went missing and you think something terrible has happened to the dog, and that turns out to be kind of a red herring plot, and the dog reappears, but something else terrible is happening. So I think you can play with that kind of expectation really nicely. But yeah, in this case, no dogs were harmed at all.
Great. And we were talking, it's publication day tomorrow.
Yeah.
Before did we talk about this when we went live, or before?
I think we mentioned
planning to.
Oh yeah, we did.
What events, apart from obviously with us tonight, have you got planned?
So there's a local radio station where I live who are very kindly doing an interview with me, and it's going to be sort of promoted on that show. I've got as I say, a book launch coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm doing a festival in a few months' time, which will be really exciting because that's the first time I've ever sort of spoken at a book festival, which will be brilliant. So yeah, I've got a few things lined up, which is exciting. And based on what, book one of the best things about having a book published is just sometimes getting feedback from readers, just really unexpectedly, people you don't know who've enjoyed reading your book. And I'd never really thought about what that would feel like, but it's the most amazing feeling. So that's been such a brilliant thing since I got published last summer. And I'm hoping that once this book is out in the world, there'll be sort of some more hopefully positive feedback from readers, which I'm really, really looking forward to seeing.
Great. What's the festival you're going to?
It's in a bookshop called Tea Leaves and Reads, who are doing a festival of various different writers. I don't think it's all crime fiction. I think it's a mixture. So I'm going to talk about both of my books as part of a panel of crime writers, which will be very exciting.
Where in the world is that?
It's down in Hampshire, I think, so not that far away from me, which will be good. And yeah, they're a really nice little bookshop, and they do sort of online sales as well. So yeah, I think it should be a really good event. And I love going to sort of book festivals. Went to Harrogate last year and really enjoyed that. Planning to go again this year. It was a great way of kind of meeting readers and writers, and yeah, so the idea of actually speaking at one is quite exciting.
I like book festivals to go to, and I really enjoy Harrogate because it's very sociable, but then I kind of need to have a break afterwards.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so sociable, and I'm like, I don't.
It's quite intense, isn't it? As you say, it's really friendly. There's lots of people to sort of start conversations with, but then after like a couple of days of that, you do kind of need to sit in a darkened room for a couple of hours by yourself, just thinking, oh, that was great. But yeah, it was just really good, sort of meeting so many other people who love crime fiction. It's such a great idea.
Yeah, it's great. I had a really lovely time there last year.
Yeah, and it comes around quite quickly as well. I can't believe it's not that far away. You need to actually sort out some accommodation and get some things booked.
Do you stay in Harrogate itself?
Probably. It's what I did last time. And again, really nice place to stay. And it feels like you're kind of in the center of things, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty central in the town, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great. I really enjoyed that.
There and Bradford Literature Festival are two of my favourites.
Okay. I've not been to that. There was the one in Bristol as well, a crime fiction one, but I think that might be the last one this year.
The Bradford one's kind of multi-genre, but it has like a weekend, and it's kind of all across the city, and it's really good. It has like loads of different events that are really good.
Yeah, okay, I'll check that one out as well.
It's very multicultural as well, which is
good. That sounds brilliant.
Very, very representative of Bradford.
Okay, well, that sounds really great. I'll have a look.
And it has a really beautiful Waterstones.
I love visiting different Waterstones.
It's well known. It's quite famous. Bradford.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the old Wool Exchange.
Oh, cool.
In the city, and it is like really, really pretty. It's like one of those where people post the pictures every so often. You get them posted in the group every now and again, and people going, "Oh, look at this! It's really beautiful."
I love a beautiful bookshop. I was in Oxford at the weekend, and they went to Blackwell's, which has got like this really beautiful kind of middle bit with all the like a giant cave full of books, and yeah, there's something just so exciting about being in a beautiful location with so many different books to choose from.
Exactly. I think all readers are like that, aren't they? We just love it.
Yeah, there's something about physical books. Like ebooks are great, and I read lots of them, but there's something about being in a physical bookshop surrounded by lots of beautiful physical books that is very exciting. I always end up buying things that I don't actually, I always go in thinking no more books, and then always come out clutching a book. So
yeah, me too. I find them very calming.
Yeah, you're right. There's something very soothing about the experience of kind of buying a book and then taking it home and kind of starting it. Yeah.
Or then having people being grumpy with you because you brought home too many books.
Exactly. I know I'm trying to have a one in, one out policy at the moment, but it's really not working. I just don't have any room. But
yeah,
it doesn't
work for me either. I would imagine you have the same problems I do, because I tried to not buy books for a while after Christmas, but still got sent them.
Yeah, that's also, I mean, that's brilliant as well. I love being sent books. It's
absolutely amazing.
But it adds to the number of books. And but I mean, I'm just very bad at getting rid of them. I think once I have them, I kind of don't want to let them go either. So sort of trying to be logical about the amount of space that there is to actually store them doesn't seem to be working in terms of actually donating some to the charity shop or just clearing some space.
Sarah, who's watching, is saying that Huddersfield is good as well.
Ooh, okay. Great.
We're just trying to persuade you to come to Yorkshire, basically.
No, it sounds great. I would love to.
And she also asked if you've ever acted out a scene.
Ooh, that's a great question. Sometimes I think,
or in public.
Sorry, in private or in public?
Or in public, yeah.
Sometimes I do, when I'm trying to think about the logistics of a kind of, it's quite often of a physical scenario, a kind of altercation, or somebody's doing something to somebody else or grabbing hold of somebody else. I sometimes do then, because partly it's that I want to work it out in my head. Is it kind of possible? And partly I just want to, when I'm describing it, be able to think, okay, hang on, so your hand would be where, and what would you do with, So yes, I do sometimes do that. Again, I think it's partly because when I write stuff, I need to be able to, like writing about places I know, I feel like I need to sometimes have experienced a thing to be able to write about it, although that's an odd thing to say given I write about some quite dark things. But I think sometimes it's the mechanics of a situation become much clearer once you've actually tried to do the thing. And I thought that I was quite unusual in doing this, but I actually think that having spoken to some other writers recently, and particularly sometimes crime writers, I think people do seem to find playing with an actual physical scenario quite helpful.
Yes, that's a favourite group question, and answers. It's a lot more common than you think, people.
That's a relief. It's all those things that you think make you weird, and then you discover it's actually okay. Like when I used to worry that my Google search history, if anyone ever looked at it, would just be the most disturbing thing ever, and then discovered that pretty much every crime writer has the same fears. You end up Googling some very odd things.
Yeah, I fully understand that. I'm a teacher, so I already have a pretty weird search history from. Anyone ever, I think it would confuse people.
Yeah, fortunately, hopefully no one is ever going to look. But and one of the best things about writing and filling out an idea, I love the kind of research stage of it. I think maybe this plays into my interest in writing historical crime fiction as well. I love that element of like, oh, this is an idea, but how does that thing actually work in practice? Or what would happen to a body in this situation? Or, all those questions that are quite weird questions. It's usually really fascinating finding out the answers. And a lot of the time that stuff doesn't necessarily make it into the book because people don't want to just read endless reams of your research, but it's useful for kind of filling out the picture in your own head, I think. And sometimes, for me anyway, that will spark off other ideas. When I do that research, it'll suddenly lead me down a rabbit hole or give me another idea that I want to kind of incorporate. So the Googling of strange questions has been quite productive for me, I think.
And it must, maybe even if you go down a rabbit hole and find something that you wouldn't necessarily use for that book, it maybe helps with other ones as well.
Exactly, I think that's true. So I'm kind of gradually realizing as well that that's not necessarily any wasted ideas or wasted research, because as you say, even if it doesn't work out this time, if it's something interesting or intriguing, it will normally stick around in your head and pop back at some point, and you're like, oh, actually that works here, or that character would actually work in this situation. So I think I found that really helpful. So I will tend just to scribble stuff down, even if it's not sort of directly relevant to what I'm working on at the moment, but it's interesting. I will try and store it somewhere so that I can come back to it later.
Cool. One of the questions I always ask is, what have you read recently and enjoyed? So I know we talked about your favorite psychological thrillers earlier, but what have you read recently and enjoyed?
Something I've just started reading, but I haven't got very far with, but I know I am going to enjoy because I've enjoyed a lot of other books by this person, is Ellie Griffiths' latest book, which is called, I think, Frozen People. And I'm a big sort of Ellie Griffiths fan of both the sort of the Brighton novels and the Ruth Galloway novels. And I heard her talking about this new book, actually, I think at Harrogate last year, and was really intrigued by it. And as people probably already know, it's a kind of historical time traveling detective story, I guess, is how I'm going to describe it. So it sort of crosses several different genres. And as I say, I haven't got that far so far, but I'm already kind of sucked in and enjoying the concept of, you know, a team investigating cold cases who actually get to kind of travel back in time and sort of investigate them in the moment. I think that's a really great idea. So yeah, looking forward to reading the rest of that.
That was a really good book.
Have you finished it?
I finished it a while ago and then talked to Ellie about it on Sunday for the group.
Ooh, brilliant. Okay, I'll have to listen to that. When I finish that, I will come back and listen to it.
Which was good. I'm a big fan. I like her Justice series a lot.
Is that the children's series? Yeah, I really want to read those as well.
One of my prized possessions is a signed one of the Justice books.
Ooh, that's great.
Ellie signed for me at Harrogate.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I really like her writing. Again, it's kind of just instantly sucks you in, and you know, that's exactly the quality that I kind of am looking for. That thing of you open the page and then before you know it, you've kind of read 30 pages and you haven't even thought about it.
Which is what you want, isn't it? And I guess like crime is very good for that, pulling you in.
Yeah, I think it's that kind of element of the puzzle, isn't it? For me, anyway, that's the thing that I like about all the different genres of crime fiction. That sense that you've got some kind of puzzle that you're trying to solve, and that hooks you in, and you know, great characters and so on help as well. But for me, it's the puzzle that's the thing that gets me, I think.
Although I'm always really bad at solving the puzzles.
I'm quite bad, although I think I've got better. And as I've kind of written more, I guess when I'm reading, sometimes I'm reading with a writer head on as well as a reader head, and I'm thinking, oh, like why? I guess you start to think more about, oh, why would you mention that? You know, I guess I'm starting to see different things, and that's really interesting to me as well. I'm starting to see how people sort of construct stories a bit more, but that doesn't by any means mean that I'm always sort of guessing the answer to the puzzle either. Fortunately, because I wouldn't want to be always knowing how it was going to turn out. But it is interesting, and again, I love rereading crime fiction because sometimes when you know the answer, it's just brilliant to see how someone gets there, and the kind of the stages along the way where you could have realized what was going on. And as a huge Agatha Christie fan, I've really enjoyed rereading some of those, even though I know them really well, because the skill that goes into creating those plots is just absolutely amazing.
Have you been to the Agatha Christie festival? Because isn't there a crime festival for Agatha?
I think there is. Is it in Torquay, I want to say? I have never been. I did go to her house last year, though, in Devon, and that was really exciting. It's like this beautiful house just set on the cliff tops. And they've got lots of her old books there, and all her possessions are basically still there. And it's kind of fascinating insight into what her life was like. And just the sheer productivity as well, like the amazing sort of to be able to produce that many brilliant books is so impressive.
Was that Greenway?
Yeah, I really recommend that if people haven't been. It's such a great place to visit.
It's pretty awesome. I went to a wedding there.
Did you? Yeah. Wow, amazing place to get married.
Yeah, and then they let us look around while we were waiting for the wedding to start.
Oh, so cool.
So we kind of got to do 2 nice things.
That's brilliant. Yeah, it's really great, isn't it? And they've got like the boathouse where I think it's Death and Folly is set. And they've got a chair that she used to sit on, and you get to sit in her chair, and it just kind of blew my mind. I think they had to prize me out of the chair. There was something very exciting about sitting in Agatha Christie's own chair.
Well, that's the joy of the Harrogate Festival as well, isn't it? Because that's where she disappeared to.
Yeah, there's a Christie connection there as well. And actually, I grew up quite near Newlands Corner, which is where she disappeared, where her car was found at the start of that kind of disappearance period. So that was when I was little, and I kind of got into Agatha Christie. That always fascinated me as well.
Yeah, I would imagine it would. So we've got about 3 minutes left. Remind people what they're going to go away and buy tomorrow.
So it's called She Wants You Gone. I actually have a copy of it here, just in case. So that's what it looks like. Oh, not very good at finding the camera. And yeah, it's out tomorrow. And if you like sort of twisty, tense psychological thrillers, then I think this is definitely one for you.
And it's well worth a read. You've got. Why not show us the Summer Dare off as well? So
people I could do it. I had one beside me, but I don't. So yeah, my first book is called The Summer Dare, also a psychological thriller. Completely different characters, but also a kind of full of twists and full of long buried secrets as well. It's about a kind of a group of friends who've done something pretty terrible in the past and then lied about it for a very long time, and it's all coming back to haunt them.
And then all that's left for me to say is thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
It's always a pleasure. Come back when you've written your one set on an island.
I will do, definitely. Thank you. Bye, everyone.